Now, as I've showed in previous videos, it really doesn't matter if the outside of your engine is dirty, but it's important that the inside of your engine is clean. So of course, you want to change your oil regularly to keep the engine clean that way, but realize that when gasoline burns in Earth's atmosphere inside your engine, that one of the byproducts is carbon, and carbon can take up space inside your engine. If you get a lot of carbon buildup inside the combustion chamber, the carbon takes up space. That space will make the compression ratio go higher because you have less space in the same area. It'll make the compression higher compression. It can lead to pre-ignition, your engine clanging when you're driving around. It's not a good thing. Now, in conventional gasoline engine like this Toyota Matrix, the fuel injectors are on the intake. So when the air gets sucked into the engine, the fuel injectors spray gasoline with that, and they go over the intake valves as they're sucked in. And if you know anything about gasoline, it's a very good solvent, it's a very good cleaner. So you generally don't get much carbon buildup on the valves of a conventional engine if you use good gasoline and change your oil regularly. But if you have one of these modern GDI gasoline direct injection systems, an older Volkswagen with one, they're notorious for carboning up the engine because the GDI injectors are directly spraying fuel into the block. They don't spray it over the intake valves. And with all this anti-pollution equipment, the PCV system can take oil deposits and stuff out of the engine and burns it, but since it's no longer mixed with gasoline when it goes over the intake, it can build up carbon on the intake system. I guess you could say they should have seen it coming when you're talking about the Volkswagen engineers, but alas, they didn't see it coming. I've seen Volkswagen engines that were so carboned up that you had to take the intake off and you had to get a sandblasting machine, and instead of putting sand in it, you would put walnut shells because they're softer, and you would actually have to blast the carbon off the inside of the engine. Now, some of the really modern engines that have GDI, like some of the Toyotas, they actually have a GDI system, and then they also have the regular fuel system on the intake system, and the computer alternates back and forth, so the regular injectors on the intake spray gasoline over the intake valves to help clean them. And those engines, hey, they don't have a problem with them carboning up as long as you use good gasoline and change the oil regularly. I see a lot of people are trying to sell carbon cleaning to their customers. They went out, they bought a machine, they want to pay for the machine and make a profit, so they try to tell everybody, oh, your engine needs carbon cleaning, we got to carbon clean your engine. And many times that's not the case. They don't need carbon cleaning. Now, if you want to see if your engine needs carbon cleaning, you can use one of these bore scopes and look inside your engine. I like this one because it's a standalone unit, but heck, I've even bought $14 ones on eBay, hook up to either your laptop or your phone, and they work perfectly fine too, so they don't cost much anymore. We'll just take off stupid beauty cover and take off this ignition coil. Out it comes. And remove the spark plug. Then we get the scope and look inside. And as we can see inside here, this thing's pretty clean. There's no clumps of carbon lying around, which doesn't surprise me at all in this Matrix engine. Hey, we don't drive it that much. I change the oil every 3,000 miles, use a high quality synthetic oil, and use good gasoline. And both my wife and I are pretty fast drivers, so we keep the engine revved up, which helps clean it out. Yeah, engines can carbon up if you don't go over 30 miles an hour. That's where the supposed myth of the Italian tune-up actually does work quite well in cars that are driven too slow. The Italian tune-up being the slang for getting on a highway, driving your car real fast. My wife used to have a Camry station wagon and she drove it 3 miles a day back and forth to work in city traffic. One time we took it to San Antonio, which takes about 4 hours to drive, and the speed limit some of the way is 75, 80 miles an hour. And when we got back, boy, that thing ran even better. It ran okay before, but it idled better, smoother, had more acceleration, because that helped clean the carbon out of the engine from it going too slow all the time. But let's say you looked inside, you saw a whole bunch of carbon, and you need to clean your engine out. Maybe you bought a used car, maybe it goes too slow. There are lots of carbon cleaning systems out there, but only a few of them are actually safe. Now, one is using water. What's water do when it gets really hot? Turns to steam. Steam cleaning can clean things really well. Now, it actually can work, but it has one main disadvantage. If you're attempting to do it yourself by spraying it in or just pouring it in the engine, you get too much water in, you can hydrolock the engine, bend the pistons, do all kinds of damage. Now, professional mechanics have water cleaning machines. It takes about 40 minutes to do. You pay the mechanic to do it. He has a machine that's set up for that so that it doesn't do any damage. It's a relatively complicated procedure. It's not just sitting there guessing, spraying or pouring water in the intake. Back in World War II, some fighter planes, they had a system that if they were being attacked and they had to try to get away as fast as possible, they could actually inject coolant to the engine right into the engine, because not only does it clean, but of course it gives a boost of power. Hydrogen, H2O, oxygen, you get more power that way. It's not something you're going to do all the time. Sometimes the engines would blow up, but I guess if someone's behind you with 50 caliber machine guns blasting away, you really don't think about damaging the engine that much. The machine that seems to do the best cleaning that I tried out is the ATS chemical one. The 3C induction cleaner. It hooks up to the induction, and what it does is there's a microprocessor and it has timed release of chemicals that they've created to clean all the different parts and do it correctly without damaging the engine. Now I remember a little while back when Ford came out with their GDIs and they were having carboning up problems, Ford put out a note that said, do not use these carbon cleaning chemicals because if you do, chunks might come off. And if you have a turbocharger, it can break the turbocharger. If you have big enough chunks, it could clog up the catalytic converter. They were saying not to use these cleaners, but this system works differently. It took these guys years to figure this out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I guess there's nothing else to do in Albuquerque, so you might as well invent something. Modern fuels, additives, oils and their additives. So having a new system with special chemicals run by a microprocessor, it only makes sense to me. So as far as I'm concerned, the ATS cleaner seems to do the best job of any of them out there. But as I said before, you have to decide, hey, do you really need your engine carbon cleaned in the first place? Of course, you can test it like I showed with the borescope. If you got an older Volkswagen with the older GDI system, I definitely would advise having that done every once in a while because they have a problem with building up. But if you have a normal non-GDI engine and you drive at normal highway speeds a lot, you probably don't need any cleaning. But if you drive like a turtle, or let's say you just bought a used car from an estate, from an old person that hardly drove at all, and maybe it has 15,000 miles and it's 18 years old, it'd probably be a good idea to have some carbon clean done to that. But don't be misled by the promises of your car's going to run better, it's going to have more performance, it's going to get better gas mileage. If your car runs perfectly fine now, you really don't need it carbon cleaned, because modern gasoline configuration, they keep perfecting it. It burns much better than the gasoline when I was a kid. When my grandfather was a young mechanic, heck, those Model T Fords would carbon up all the time. Practically every winter, you'd have to tear the engine apart, clean the carbon off the valves and the pistons, and put it back together again. Those days are long gone. And since the fuel injector systems are run by computers, as is the ignition, modern cars are much more efficient. You're not going to have the buildup as carbon as much because of that reason. But whatever you do, don't just get a jug of water and start pouring it down the throttle of the engine. You can destroy an engine doing that. I've seen that happen. And please, don't go to one of those car washes and use one of their wands that has the high pressure steam and do it. Totally unregulated. And you'll probably destroy your engine if you start spraying that inside. So now you know the truth about carbon cleaning your engine. And realize, for most people, most of the time, it's an unnecessary process your car just doesn't need. Because unfortunately, carbon cleaning, that's become like some of the snake oil products where people say, add this to your engine's oil and it'll run better and rebuild your engine while you drive. It's all a bunch of nonsense too. The additives in oil are fine. The additives in modern gasoline are also fine. For normal driving, you don't have to mess around with carbon cleaning. But if you are worrywart, hey, pull out a spark plug or two. Look inside with a borescope. If it's clean inside, yeah, you don't have to do anything. Now there's that old saying, cleanliness is next to godliness. Well, in case of your car's engine, as far as I'm concerned, that's a bunch of nonsense. Check out my old Celica's engine. Dirty and greasy, still running strong after all these years. I've never cleaned it. But take my shiny Triumph motorcycle, look how clean that engine is. That I clean. And why is that, other than vanity? It's because my Triumph is an air-cooled motorcycle. And my car, it's a water-cooled engine. It's water that cools the engine. With a motorcycle, air has to blow over the fins on the cylinder to help cool the engine down. If it gets dirty and greasy, that'll keep it from dissipating heat that well. But in most cars these days, they're water cooled. You want to keep all the fins cleaned. Here, down inside here where the air flows to cool the radiator, you want that all clean. But the engine itself, doesn't matter if it's dirty. The heat is dissipated through the radiator, not the engine itself. And modern cars have so many electronic parts in them. You start spraying cleaner, then hosing it off with water, or even worse, using a pressure washer at a car wash. You can destroy the electronics of the car cleaning it. And over the years, I've had scores of customers that have done that, or their friends did it to their cars and they towed them over to me. Sometimes I had to buy new computers because the wiring shorted out from all the water and cleaner and ended up frying the computer. I've even had it where they put so much spray inside there that it sucked water inside the air filter and then hydrolocked the engine and ended up bending the piston rods. So unless you're planning on having a picnic inside your car's hood, it's stupid to clean your engine. It doesn't serve any purpose. Heck, you can't even see the stuff until you open the hood. Yeah, polish the hood and the paint make it look nice, but hey, you don't live under here. But that said, there are times when you want to clean crud off of your engine, and that has to do with leaks. Oil leaks especially. Oil does not go well with electricity. I've had many customers, they'll have a leaking valve cover gasket. That'll end up leaking down. It can get on the alternator, it can get on the starter, and that oil will eventually short it out. And the same thing goes for coolant leaks. If you get coolant leaks and coolant is leaking on the alternator, or the starter, or the distributor, any electronic parts, that can ruin them. And you need to remove that stuff after you fix the problem. Of course, cleaning it doesn't fix the problem. You have to fix the problem first. If a valve cover gasket is leaking, you replace that. Then you clean all the residue oil off so it doesn't do any damage. If you look under your car and you see things leaking, first you figure out what's leaking, find the source of the leak, fix it, and then clean the mess up. And to find the leaks, I use this ultraviolet leak dye. You put it in whatever's leaking, the engine oil, the coolant, whatever. Then you use an ultraviolet light and these funky yellow sunglasses, and you can see where the leak's coming from. And since leaks leak all over the place, it's often hard to pinpoint where it starts. So the ultraviolet leak dye really has made it easier for people to find leaks. But then if you have oil or coolant all over the place, you do want to clean that off so the residue doesn't destroy electronics. And to do that, you're going to use engine degreaser, but the first thing is take off the negative battery terminal. You don't want to short out electronics, so you want to loosen it, wiggle it, move it out of the way. Then you want to carefully spray the degreaser on the greasy parts, wherever the leaks were. And here's yet another tip. You want to do it on an ice cold engine. This one's been sitting all night, so it's nice and cold. You don't want to be spraying degreaser on a hot engine, and then when you rinse it off with a hose, you don't want ice cold water hitting a red hot engine, and you can make metal crack, gaskets could go. You don't want to mess around with heat, so do this all on a cold car. Now, of course, things like alternators, look, they're exposed to the weather. When it rains, water comes up from the bottom, water comes through the radiator, it gets wet. It's made that it can take a little bit of water, but you don't want to have cleaner and electricity going through it, and then water with it connected to the system, so now there's no power going to it, and it's cool, so you won't have any problems if you do it on a cool engine with the battery disconnected. But that said, you still don't want to be spraying things like the distributor. It's all electronic. You don't want to get this stuff wet. Some guys will even put a plastic bag on it. And definitely stay away from things like circuit boxes and relay boxes. You don't want to get them wet. Then, like most things in life, have a little patience. It's a good idea to wait half an hour, 45 minutes for the degreaser to soak in, to do its thing, and if it's really dirty, you can get a scrub brush and you can scrub some of it off. When I was a young mechanic, we used to use kerosene on the garage floor, spray it on, then scrub it, and then hose it off. Well, this is the same idea, only I'm not doing this. I'm using one of these fingernail scrubbers. It helps to agitate it, and if it's been on there a while, it'll get the really tough parts off. And then just wait, like I said, half an hour, 45 minutes. Then get your garden hose and hose it off. And again, just do this on a cold engine so you won't have any problems. You can wait a couple hours for it to dry, or do what I do. Get a giant fan. It'll dry it a lot quicker. Then when it's dry, put the battery terminal back on. Don't forget to tighten it up. And away you go. So now you know when not to clean your car's engine and when to actually clean it. Now, it's come to my attention lately, a lot of guys would say, hey, I like flushing my engine oil every once in a while to get the crud out. Is that really a good idea, or am I damaging something? Now, when I was a young mechanic, a lot of cars used non-detergent oil. These engines did not have oil filters on them, so the oil had to keep crud from building up on the soft engine bearings. Here's a piston with a piston rod, and this end goes on the crankshaft that has soft metal bearings. They're made so if there's a problem, they'll be degraded, then they can be taken apart and rebuilt. But that was all fine and dandy with the simple cars they built in the 1950s. I've even seen bills that people had for having their engine rebuilt, and it was only like 75 bucks. But today, rebuilding a complex modern engine might cost $7,500. So you don't want to do any damage to your engine. All modern cars use detergent oil. If you look on this SDP bottle, control sludge formation and clean key components. They're all detergent-based oil. The old non-detergent oil were made so that the oil would get the bad pieces and it would make them stick on the side of the engine and the valleys inside and not on the bearings. So these old engines, hey, they build up sludge like mad. I remember taking apart engines that it was almost like tar in there. You'd have to scrape parts off that baked on the engine. You don't want to have that happen in your modern car. So in modern cars with detergent oil and oil filters, because those old cars didn't even have oil filters, the oil filter gets rid of the particulates that are floating in, and anything else will be held in suspension by the detergent oil. Some of those synthetic oils, they say they can last 20, but I'd never do that. But a lot of guys will change them every 10, and that's perfectly fine because all the crud stays in suspension and doesn't create sludge on the metal parts. So the main thing to do with modern cars is change your oil regularly so you don't have any problems with your engine. Modern designs do not need to have their engine oil flushed ever, as long as you change the oil frequently. But let's say you bought a used car and the previous owner was a slob, and when you take off the valve cover, you see there's all kinds of sludge inside. Well, what do you do then? Well, of course, you shouldn't have bought such a car in the first place. But here's the problem that can occur with an engine flush. On an old worn engine, sometimes it's the sludge and stuff that's keeping it from burning oil. It seals the pistons a little bit better. And if you run a flush and it makes everything clean, you might find out it starts burning oil, which it wasn't doing in the first place. And even worse, if it had a ton of sludge in there and this stuff starts breaking it up, if that sludge gets stuck into little oil galley holes, it can stop the oil flow. You could blow the engine. The bearings will overheat, then the engine will knock a hole in itself. And in modern engines like this variable valve timing Toyota Matrix engine, realize that all the hydraulics that run the variable valve timing have very tiny little holes, especially inside the solenoids. Some of them have tiny little screen filters. And if you're running a flush and pieces start to clog that up, the variable valve timing system can stop working. I had a customer have one, bought it used, thought I'll flush the engine oil. So they did, then it started running like crap. And I told them, well, you know, I ran my scan tool, looks like it has a problem with the variable valve timing system. Let me start checking it out. And when I did, he was lucky, because first thing I did was I went to the variable valve timing solenoids that activate them. And sure enough, when I took them off the engine, which wasn't that big of a deal, they were all coated with crud and it was all jammed up inside. Then I had to take that off and then get air, compressor air, and blow through all the holes that fed the engine for the variable valve timing. And it did go back to working again. But this car ran perfectly fine before he did the motor flush. He wouldn't have bought the car, he was a smart guy. But after flushing that oil, it wasn't running fine anymore. And another thing that can go wrong with engine oil flushes is this. If it is a dirty, crowded up engine, a lot of times it's that crud that's keeping the oil seals from leaking. Underneath that, they may be old cracked seals, and when you flush it out and then they get all cleaned out, you start leaking oil. You might think, oh Scotty, it's just an oil seal, costs $10. But let's say it's the rear main oil seal of the engine. What do you got to do to replace that? You either got to pull the transmission off or pull the engine out of the car, and it's going to cost an awful lot of money on a modern day car. Could well be over $1,000. Because I've seen guys flush out an engine on a car they're selling because they know it's all crowded up inside, only to find out once they were done flushing it, now they can't sell it because it's burning a ton of oil and then it's leaking out of the sides. So you might not want to do an engine flush on any car. Change the oil more often and keep it clean. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.